I want to tell you a story. This is Rob's first ever shiny Pokemon. By the way, guys, this is my narrator voice. This video is literally much more story-based, probably going to be a lot less memes. We'll keep it light-hearted where we can, but this is a little heavier than I thought. But yeah, this is my first ever shiny Pokemon. This is actually two stories in one, because the story of how I almost died plays a part in the story of my first ever shiny Pokemon. So yeah, 2-for-1 story time. Rob's first shiny, Rob when he almost died. Two stories in one. I was 7 years old when I had a horrible injury. Which sounds like a pretty morbid way to start things, but this is where it begins. This is how I get my Pokemon game. Just about a year before my parents broke up, I was living in Preston, which is here. I'll get a map of England. I'm living here right now. This is where I used to live. I was 7 years old. And bloody, I had a horrible injury. So 7-year-old Rob is chilling at home with my cousin Jasmine, my sister Laura, and my brother Floyd, and we're just having normal 7-year-old times. We used to get on top of each other's bunk beds, and we fling underpants at each other like a war. It would be like a firefight, but with underpants. It was mad. But anyway, I forgot exactly what happened that day, but my sister, my older sister, had pissed me off somehow, and I was chasing her around the house because I was so furious with her. She had ran outside the house because she had shoes on. I didn't have any footwear on, so I just stayed indoors. And 7-year-old Robert stands at the door, which is like this glass door. So it's a big white kitchen door next to our sink, and there was a big glass pane in it because it's a door to lead outside. It's a door that provides light. Glass door, you get the idea. So I stand at this door and I go, "Good riddance!" and I'd slam the door, but what I hadn't noticed was that my hand was leaning on the door, and I pushed my entire hand through the glass of the door, and I pulled it back, and there was just red. There was blood. So I pulled my hand back, and I didn't feel any pain. So there was a delay when I hadn't even realized that I had just done something horrific to my arm. I pause. I look at it, and I scream. I immediately start, like, hysterically, loudly screaming, louder than I've ever screamed before. I was just, like, in immediate shock. And I ran down the hallway, completely bleeding. So at this point, because it was a very, very deep cut, I was bleeding all over the hallway. I was just covering the walls with blood at this point. And eventually they start to hear the screaming, and my cousin and my brother come out from the other room, and then they start screaming. And I remember my sister telling me what happened. She walked back and saw the glass door but didn't see any blood, and she just thought, "Oh, Robert's in trouble, he's broken a fucking door." Comes in and sees blood and hears screaming, and then she starts screaming, and everybody who was very young at this point, my sister was only 4 years older than me, so I was 7, and she was 11 at the time, so we are children, we are home alone, and I am bleeding out. At this point, I think it's worth mentioning, I didn't cut my hand. My hand was perfectly fine. I had slit my wrist on the door. I had slit, like, the major artery in my wrist. The area that people go for when they're trying to off themselves. I had accidentally completely severed that, and the nerves to my, like, I cut the nerves to my little and fourth finger, so they were completely numb. They were completely limp, couldn't do anything with them because the nerve had been completely slit. That's why there was no pain. I'd destroyed my ability to feel pain in those fingers, and I was just spouting from my wrist. So we go sit on the sofa. I get, like, a towel to try and cover up the blood. By the way, I'm, like, streaming with tears and, like, being really melodramatic. I remember saying to myself, "Oh, I'm too young to die. Now's not the time." And I was fucking 7. I was very clearly, very melodramatic at the time. My sister picks up the phone to call emergency services. We are home alone, so we're shit scared, and she can barely contain herself. So after she gets through to the emergency services and is blubbering down the phone, my slightly calmer cousin Jasmine pinches the phone off her and is like, "Yeah, hi, my cousin's dying. He's bleeding a lot from his arm after he went through a glass door. Can you help us, please? Can you get an ambulance?" And luckily, because we live in UK, where emergency services aren't like a fucking expensive nightmare, there was a paramedic who came rather quickly to help us out. There was like 3 men, all in green, like bright green, and they just brought in a bunch of tools and Bob, and they're like, "Oh, how did this happen? Have you put pressure on it? Is there anything in the wound?" and all that bollocks. Long story short, Robert was rushed off to hospital. He spent weeks off school. He got a thermoplastic cast put on. It was all very, very dramatic and scary for me, but what does not kill me makes me stronger. And here's a little juice. Here is the scar. This is a good... If I had the injury when I was 7, this scar is 13 to 14 years old, so it's had a lot of time to heal. And as you can see, it's very still clearly a big... apparent scar. It was a huge laceration in my arm, but it was pretty gnarly. I could actually see the bone poking out of my arm when it had first happened, and it just wouldn't stop fucking bleeding. But here I am today, perfectly alive, with a hand that I can write with. It's cool. It didn't die. I'm still about catch me outside, all that shit. And at this point, you must be thinking, Rob, what the fuck has this got to do with a shiny Pokemon? Well, my delightful fans. What had happened was that while I was in hospital, and by the way, at the time, I had a Game Boy Advance, and I was fucking obsessed with it. I would spend hours playing Metabots and Super Mario, and one of the older Pokemon games. While I was in hospital, I was given a gift by my mother and father, and this was my first ever Generation 3 game. I wouldn't have had it if I hadn't had this injury, because God knows they wouldn't have bought me shit, because, poverty. But they got me a copy of Pokemon Ruby for the Game Boy Advance, and I fucking loved it. I would go on to play this game for years and years to come. This was like the start of my Pokemania. I hadn't played any Gen 2 games up until that point. I had only finished Pokemon Yellow, and then I skipped straight to Generation 3. But I had seen like Johto Pokemon in the anime, so I was still kind of up to date with shit like that. But Ruby, played a shit ton of Ruby, played hours of Ruby. I remember I went to summer school, my friend got the guide for Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, and I was like, whoa, look at all these, how do you know so much about Pokemon? And he helped me get through a bunch of bits that I was stuck with. But anyway, I'm straying from the story. Years later, after getting this game, I got onto the internet, and I realised that Cerebi.com was a website, and this is where I first discovered shiny Pokemon. Young Rob was not as intricately put together as old Rob. See, now I'm interested in like my poetry and my performance and my YouTube and instrument playing and going out with friends, getting drunk. Could you teach me some Polish real quick?
Yeah, of course, why not?
So what's the word for motherfucker?
What's motherfucker in Polish?
Matko jebca.
Matko jebca! And all that shit. Young Rob was concerned with only a few things: food, video games, and the color blue. I fucking loved the color blue when I was younger. So I looked at what shinies there were, and I looked for all the blue ones. This was my first ever unofficial shiny hunt. I went on Cerebi. I saw that shiny Voltorb, fucking blue, on that shit. See, I didn't really know about shiny hunting though, even though I now found out that shinies existed. I didn't know shit about the Masuda method. And to be fair, when you're that young and you don't have Wi-Fi, you can't just go and get like a Japanese Pokemon to try and increase your chances of shinies using the Masuda method or anything like that. You can't chain, there's no Poke Radar or any of that bollocks. You just gotta fucking settle down, get a tent, get a tall glass of orange juice, go to a fucking route and just look. So I went to New Morville, underneath Morville City, that you have to pass across the water. I went looking for this Voltorb. I didn't get a fucking Voltorb. Life would never be that simple, but that day I was incredibly lucky because I actually found 2 shinies, not just one, but 2. Later that day I went and found a shiny Coughing. But this video is about my first shiny, and technically, when I went to New Morville City and I was chaining around looking for a fucking Voltorb, I found my first ever shiny. It was a shiny Magnemite. And I found it quick. I wasn't like, I remember it not taking hours and hours and hours. I remember it being like half an hour to 45 minutes, just one session. Like, looking back to it now, it was incredibly lucky for me to get 2 shinies in one day without expending that much time. But at the time, I didn't know what the chances were, and it wasn't fucking blue, so it didn't feel lucky. But no, little Rob had crazy shiny luck. Yeah, and my first ever shiny was a fucking Magnemite. All that was required was a fucking near-death experience for me to get the game in the first place as a gift, and then a bit of patience looking around a route. that's my fucking story. It's quite good that they got me Pokemon, to be fair. I only had one arm while I was in hospital, and Pokemon was one of the few games where you could actually just play with one hand, because you could go in the options and turn L to A, and then you could literally play the whole game with one hand. It was fucking great. But, no, it was nice. It's a nice memory for me. And if it isn't evident, I don't know how to finish videos, so, fucking hope that you enjoyed the story. Bye! I've actually now started a little lore wall for my videos, so there's a shiny Magnemite for this video, there was a Clam Scram, fucking Chorus, and I've still got some more to make, but I was thinking I would add to this wall as more videos get done. Oh, and as a Patreon thing as well, I'm going to have a second wall of shit over there, with things like these to represent my patrons. So, if you're a patron, find me on Patreon and tell me what you want, and we can make you part of the wall and you'll be part of the Ragnarobb family. But otherwise, today's one was this guy, Shiny Magnemite.